Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Elseworlds Exchange. I am joined today by the incredible and illustrious Bard from Bardic Broadcast. Bard, thank you so much for joining me again, man.
Hello, hello. It's wonderful to be here once more.
Right? It's been a really long time since the last
Ah,
time you graced us with your presence. But you just recently released a video, and at the time of this recording, it was, I think, a couple weeks old, but it was great to see you come back. And
yes.
you took the internet by storm, man. It was the video really blew up, and the response has been incredible, and I'm really happy to see that people really missed your absence, and that maybe this is a good sign of things to come.
I think so, yeah. The omens are good. I've
Right?
cast the birds to the sky and read the runes and looked at some entrails here and there. Things
Oh,
are looking
excellent.
pretty good.
Good, good, good. Well, there's you never know with those entrails, so. But in the last time we got together, we talked a little bit about what makes a superhero a superhero. And
We talked about D&D last time.
oh, that's right. The last time we talked about D&D,
Yeah,
which was really fun. And Tiffany got to join us in that one. But we're
that's
gonna go
true.
back to like a more grounded. Let's talk about supervillains this time around. What
We're
makes
revisiting
exactly?
the topic of
Yeah, because a lot of people responded to that
superheroes.
episode. They were like, "Oh man, like you should do the supervillains next," and not one to immediately deliver. We gave them a good year or so before we could actually
Oh,
approach this
yeah.
again. But you have no you're no stranger. Even though I'm more of a comic book guy, you're more of a fantasy and more
Yeah,
aficionado.
that's true. Look, I better make it clear that I'm not an expert on American comics.
No.
I don't really read them.
Right.
I've seen a lot of the films about superheroes, of course,
That's fair.
but not being an expert, we still had a good conversation about superheroes that time. I did start rambling about werewolves at one point, I think, but
yeah, that was a great conversation. You kidding me?
I don't remember all of the central points. But we'll see if we can. I should have listened to it actually before starting this.
I had the exact same thought when I went live. I said, man, I probably should have listened to that episode before. But that's great because we're
whatever.
both at a disadvantage. It's perfect.
We'll
we're
be
at
fine.
equal footing. But
Supervillains.
super
What
villains.
are they?
Right. What is a
Who are
supervillain versus like a traditional villain? And in the realm of, or in the multiple realms of other forms of fiction and literature, I'm sure you could find like a ton of examples. But like, what are some of the categories? What are some of the qualifications? Like, how does one elevate oneself from a villain to a supervillain?
There's only one qualification I believe you need, and it's dirt simple.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, the only thing that distinguishes a supervillain is the presence of a superhero.
Hmm.
All you have to do is challenge a superhero, and you're there by default. You don't even have to be successful,
Right.
and you don't have to be good at being a villain. Because, well, think about it this way. I think with a lot of villains, especially some of the ones from very popular heroes, if you remove the fact that a superhero is present, you're not left with a supervillain. They're just a villain.
That's
Put
fair.
them in any other story, and well, they're just an ordinary villain. You wouldn't call them super.
No. And in fact, depending on the perspective, you could not even necessarily call them a villain. I'm thinking specifically of like Superman versus Lex Luthor, right? Even though, your familiarity might be tertiary, it's Superman, guy who can do anything that the writers want them to be able to do, and Lex Luthor, seemingly a regular guy, but has above average intelligence. And
Yes.
when you see those two butt heads, I think you're right that the fact that he decides to take on Superman makes him a supervillain. But if he were
Yeah.
just in a vacuum, if it was just Lex Luthor, you'd have just another billionaire smart guy who tries to take over the world like any other captain of industry.
Well, compare them to like the Bond villains. There's a
Ah.
whole archetype of Bond villains. Luthor would be a wonderful Bond villain.
Agreed.
You know,
Yeah.
but you don't call Goldfinger a supervillain.
I only
But-
if you, I guess, like your criteria, only if you were to refer to James Bond as a superhero, which I don't.
Yeah, you
Um,
can't. I don't think you can anyway.
I mean, he
Like last time, I think
Yeah.
when we spoke about superheroes, I think we dwelled on the topic of identity. I
Right.
think was one of the, and I don't know if we covered this, but one of the things about superheroes is that, well, it's in the word super. It means they're all-purpose and all-encompassing. Well, it was kind of summed up in a way in the recent Aquaman film where he's told that he's a hero for everybody.
Right.
And that's kind of what a superhero is. They're overarching heroes, where if you look at like Superman, he doesn't just deal with things on his level. He burning building, I'll handle this.
That's true. Yeah, well, he's a unitasker. It's like if it's a burning
Yeah.
building or a comet that's coming here or a purse snatcher, like he can do it all.
He's the archetype,
Right.
basically, and you compare other superheroes to him. I think in many ways he's like the cornerstone.
Definitely.
So Spider-Man is a lot like that too. He has like major villains that he battles, and he takes care of lesser problems as well. See, the superhero is a really disruptive thing in the worlds they exist in. Like, there's a common like joke, I guess, or an observation that the superhero always comes first, and then all these villains appear.
Oh, right. Yes.
You know, they cause the problem more than
Right.
anything, and it's true. They are really disruptive to the equilibrium of ordinary ideas of law and order and crime and punishment because they supersede that stuff.
Yeah, if
You
it
know?
was just a superhero and they were dealing with everyday problems, they would solve most of them within the first couple of days of their action, and then what else is there left to do? But because their great strength or their great abilities are entered into our world, the universe kind of responds in kind to meet that challenge.
So, in meeting that challenge is where you get your villains. Like Lex Luthor's a great example. Now, obviously, as you said, I'm not a great knower of the inner law, but from what I've seen, Lex Luthor rises to what he sees as the problem of Superman.
Yes.
Like he thinks this alien is going to show us how to be human. I'll show him what humanity can do.
Right. It's more hubris and this kind of like railing against the other that drives him.
But Superman is ruining our own systems by existing.
Right.
In a sense.
Well, since he
You know,
transcends or supersedes them, like you say.
Yeah. Well, Gotham City is another good example because I quite often wonder how the police deal with the existence of Batman.
Yeah, and it's interesting depending on the interpretation or the like media that you're following with Batman. You could see very different interpretations where it's like sometimes the police are completely okay with Batman.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that they like have a bat signal on the roof of the police
It's
department.
very telling, isn't it?
It should basically it's a broadcasting note that says we're ineffectual and we require someone to solve most of our problems. Although like you say, the supervillain rises to meet Batman so that Batman can't solve crime in Gotham. He has to deal with the super crime. He has to deal with the extra crime, the crime that's literally just there to satisfy his existence.
Exactly. It's a very strange dynamic between supervillains and superheroes. Yeah. And as I said with superheroes last time we talked, it's not about power. Power isn't the interesting part.
No.
You know, you don't define a superhero by the fact they have power. Although, you know, obviously they have to have the capacity to fill the role.
Sure.
And even characters that have power aren't superheroes. You know, like Hercules.
Right, exactly.
He has extra normal, although I know he appears in superhero comics and no doubt is a super...
He is...
Thor is another example. He's a mythical figure who isn't a superhero.
No.
Being a Norse god, he's probably very self-absorbed and all of that sort of thing. But he's not defined as a superhero by his power. It's not having the power, it's what you do with it.
Right.
And as with Superman, he uses it to, in an overarching fashion, to be the all-purpose savior, in a sense.
Sure. Just because someone has powers, you know, people kind of ascribe, oh, well, then he must be a superhero. They must have, like, the basic tenets that make up that which I understand to be a superhero. And the fact is, like, it's actually a lot more nuanced, like you said, and it's you know, it's not quite as black and white.
There's a big difference between a hero and a superhero.
Right.
Well, a hero is really just a position in a narrative. But when you're a hero in a story, okay, you tend to be you tend to have a discrete objective that you're dealing with. You're in a discrete story. Okay, you're not an overarching hero for everybody. You're not hero status permanently like a superhero is. They occupy heroism permanently and they don't stop.
Sure. Like
just
a
because
hero,
their story is finished.
The hero of their story might only need to accomplish a personal goal, as opposed to like a more generic hero that is kind of stuck having to do, you know, like you said, stuff for everybody. Like they have to save.
Conan might be a good example.
Now, do you think Conan is a superhero? And if so,
No,
no.
he's not a superhero. He's definitely a hero, and he generally does the right thing in the context of the world he lives in.
Right.
But he's not. The battles he engages with tend to be personally related to him.
Yeah, I mean, what about
he's drawn into them?
Well, what about what was it? I'm trying to get my Conan straight. There's the first one, which is Conan the Destroyer.
Oh, Conan the Barbarian.
Okay,
are we talking about the movies?
Yeah, the movies.
The movies. Conan the Barbarian and Conan the Destroyer.
In Conan the Destroyer, he feels a lot more like a superhero in terms of like he is not necessarily out for just himself in that one.
Yes, he is. He is only on that quest because Queen Taramis promises to resurrect his
beloved,
dead love, Valeria.
Right. Okay.
Now, he
all
rises
right, you got
to
me
the
there.
and he's a good person. Okay, and he'll do the right thing in the end in that film.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the films are very different from Robert E. Howard's literary Conan. But I don't think we should dwell on literary Conan because I don't think that many people are
as well versed in him.
Will be well versed.
I gotta say,
if you look at the
go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh,
if you look at the two films, they're both very personal Conan stories.
Oh, definitely.
He doesn't come to town and right a wrong, or he doesn't see a huge problem and say, "I'll handle this." And he is not driven by an obligation to do good or anything. He's driven by his own engines of desire and
the
heroism.
first one is a deeply personal story about himself and getting. I don't even know if it's revenge so much as it is him just trying to understand who he is and where he's going.
Yeah, it's revenge, and the other stuff.
Right. By the way,
deeply motivated by revenge.
Marvel is putting out a Conan comic book right now. They just relaunched the Conan series, and it's rather excellent. I highly recommend it.
Oh, very good.
The guy who has been writing the Thor series is now doing the Conan book, and it's like he's been training to do the Conan series his entire career. We're only 2 issues in, but it feels very Conan. It's paying homage to, because Marvel used to publish a Conan book back like in the 70s and 80s, and it's kind of like harkening back to that era plus more modern storytelling. They have they're not playing it for anything other than to tell the story, which I think is pretty cool. But I recommend it to you. Anyway, I know we're getting a little bit off the thing. So Conan's not a superhero.
No, I don't think
such,
so.
But you think he's not a superhero because his journey is personal.
Yes, and he is drawn into conflicts generally for personal reasons by his own desires or things like that. He's not out to right or wrong.
Gotcha. Okay, so. All right. Well, and the criteria of a supervillain, as we've established, is literally just
challenge a superhero.
Challenge superhero. So as long as you have a superhero in your story, whatever villain comes in opposition to them is by nature a supervillain.
Yes, even ones who have no power, like Catwoman, is a supervillain by default. in any other world, she's an expert thief with a gimmick.
Yeah.
But because Batman exists, and she encounters Batman, she's suddenly a supervillain. And she often gets drawn into other supervillain plots.
Oh, definitely.
People who might be more qualified to, under conventional definitions of having superpowers and all that sort of thing.
Sure.
But Batman's, I almost said He-Man. He-Man is arguably a superhero.
Oh, absolutely. Because
He-Man... You want to compare Conan to someone, compare him to He-Man.
Well, I mean, I don't even... I was actually watching some He-Man not too long ago, and I was like, He-Man is... by your definition, certainly a superhero in that he doesn't do anything selfishly. He has no personal stakes. He just kind of like reacts to everything around him from some kind of personal desire to just right wrongs as they happen.
Yeah.
So
they can be drawn into things for their own personal reasons, like Batman is, but he is... he's driven by his own tragedies and obsessions, of course.
Yeah. But, actually, it's interesting. You're like how Conan's journey is deeply personal, and yet Superman we know is a superhero because he literally just every day he goes outside and he's like, okay, what wrongs am I going to right today? But with Batman, it's a little more personal because for him, it is deeply personal. Like everything he's doing is to right a wrong he can't possibly fix.
Mm.
So, is he a superhero, or is he more like just kind of a crime fighter or a?
He's a superhero
All right, fair enough.
for certain. Like I said, it's not about power.
No.
There's the identity thing, which we discussed last time,
Okay.
and the fact that he is compelled to oppose all crime, all wrongdoing.
Yeah.
You know, he is in an overarching fashion.
But he isn't. But he isn't
this.
doing it out of some feeling of like there's an injustice in the world. He's doing it because he's mad his parents are dead.
He sees an injustice in the world, though. Surely,
That's true. But
it's not just because his parents are dead. That's where it starts.
Yeah.
You see,
That's
he
the
could
catalyst.
right that wrong. He never does. Okay, but let's say he right.
have.
I don't know of a good example, but sometimes superheroes start with a personal story
Yeah.
and they just remain in the hero position.
Well, you know, it's
indefinitely.
a great example of that is Spider-Man because he's the guy, right? Like he has a personal stake. His Uncle Ben is murdered by the criminal that he let pass, and within the same story, he does defeat that criminal, and then henceforth never stops being Spider-Man and righting wrongs. So in that case, that completely fills in what you said. Like that completely matches your criteria, or the criteria that is positive
It's
in this
a
episode.
hypothesis.
Right, exactly.
Let's say that. I'm not trying to come to any conclusion here.
No, it's true. Yeah, we're not.
having a hypothesis.
Yeah, exactly. We're not solving any mysteries today. But
Not today. No.
But, yeah.
Like I said, I'm not. I think dwelling on power would be a great mistake in super villains as much as it is in heroes, because I think clashes of power versus power is the least interesting way you can have a villain challenge a superhero.
Absolutely.
In fact, my favorite sort of configuration is when the villain is vastly less powerful than the hero.
Why do you think that is? Is it because they have to be more resourceful, more ingenuitous, or is it because or for some other reason?
Because I think challenging power with just raw power is boring. There's something more interesting and something more humane about a villain that will challenge someone with virtually infinite power, like Superman,
Right.
who with less resources and still challenge them. Because Superman's weakness isn't power. You can talk about kryptonite all the time.
Sure.
But where you will challenge him is in his character and his morality and what
Yes.
drives him. That's where you get to Superman. If you want a villain that challenges Superman, that's what you would do. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the best Superman stories revolve around that sort of thing, and not someone of equal or greater strength showing up that Superman then has to overpower.
No, if ever there is a story that is hinged upon an equally powerful Superman, and I'm saying a Superman with like a lowercase s, who battles Superman with an uppercase s, there's always something multi-layered about it, or they are being used by another power that needed to use that to either distract him or to take him off the table so they could accomplish some other goal. I will say, though, the death of Superman's story is exactly as you describe, where it's just they invent a character for the story who is just as powerful as him, and they punch each other until they both die.
And fill it in later.
Right, and they don't even bother. Like, they kill... And what's great is for them, they're like, oh, we killed him, so we don't even have to bother to tell you his origin. They do, of course. They tell, like, 4 different stories after that about that character. But they fill it in later, like you said, as they call it a retcon. But it's not a very enduring story because there's nothing juicy or interesting about it. It's just watch Superman punch this guy, and
that's why I bring it up, because I'd read that a long time ago. I'd read The Death of Superman.
I feel like everybody had to have at some point, right? I mean, it was such a phenomenon.
It was a big deal.
Yeah.
But I remember feeling that. I remember thinking, this is no good, because there's nothing to it.
I remember being cheated. I remember being like, really? Lex Luthor didn't do it? Because when I was reading comics back then, I was not reading Superman. So one of my first Superman comics that I ever bought with my own money was that one.
Yeah.
And so my cultural understanding of Superman was completely out the window, because I'm like, who is Doomsday? What does this mean? And before you knew it, it was over, and everybody was dead. And then I kept reading Superman after that, and what I found out was how uninteresting that could be, and how it was also, interestingly enough, though, it was not emblematic of what the series normally was. And if you read books before that and after that, they're all multifaceted, and they all usually have to do with characters that are vastly underpowered compared to Superman, but still pose a credible threat.
I think a lot of the key villains of superheroes are less powerful. I think this might be more of a DC thing than a Marvel thing. Now, I'm only going off the movies.
Sure.
But in a lot of the movies that Marvel puts out, the villain is challenging directly on terms of power, whatever their motivations might be. But it comes down to a punch up.
Right.
And it's usually either they're a mirror of the hero, which is the dullest and least interesting thing you could possibly do.
Yeah.
it keeps happening, and or they're just equal power. When I look at the list of villains for some of the heroes, there's a lot of clashing of power going on. That's why I say, like, you don't beat Superman by punching him.
Right.
You know, that's the weakest thing. DC's movies are terrible for this. Actually, they're doing it wrong, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know why, but they seem compelled to put a villain that can punch the hero hard enough to win.
Well, I think it's because they have not done that for so long, and the loudest voices have been clamoring for that. That's where Man of Steel, the first Superman movie in the modern times of superhero movie making, finally has a character who can punch Superman, even though if you actually go back, you can watch Superman 2, in which he literally fights Zod, who's the same power. But even in that, the power struggle has changed, because I don't know if you're up on your 1978 Superman movies, but Superman 2, Superman he takes his own powers away so that he can be with Lois, and it's at that time that 3 new Supermen appear. So Superman is the depowered one, and they are the more powerful ones. And that's an interesting dichotomy, but they were really interested in being like, with Man of Steel and with DC after that, they're like, we're gonna show Superman really, like, actually display his power, because for the most part, if you're watching a Superman movie and it starred Chris Reeve, there was like an hour and a half of him either standing in his Superman costume or not being Superman, and then maybe 20 minutes of actual conflict. And his villains often were Lex Luthor with a real estate scheme or a computer. And that's kind of what you got. And it's interesting, actually, if you look at those movies, the fourth one, which is arguably the worst one, is the...
Arguably?
I guess, no, it's not even an argument. I think we all know it's the worst one. But it's the one that has an actual other Superman in it that Superman can fight one-on-one, and it's easily the worst one. It's the one that kind of delivers on what people have been asking for, and yet once you get it, you're kind of like, oh, it's really unfulfilling. Of course, that movie's also just lousy on its own. You didn't need the Solar Man for that. But anyway, it actually, I was thinking about what you said about how Marvel versus DC. I think it's a dead heat, because I was thinking about Spider-Man's villains and how most of them are just kind of regular people in suits that mess with him on fundamental levels. Like, his arch nemesis arguably is the Green Goblin, who is just a billionaire in a goblin costume. Like, he is not super strong. He does have like a goblin formula that makes him a little more strong, but Spider-Man is easily more strong than he is. But he attacks Spider-Man on a fundamental level, where he's like, I indiscriminately murder people, and I killed your girlfriend, and I, like, he attacks Spider-Man psychologically.
Yeah, that's how you challenge a superhero.
Yeah,
because they're invulnerable otherwise.
But I think that also is a problem, because, and that's kind of like we're getting to the core of the issue. When you think about supervillains and you think about Rogues Gallery, there are about 3 superheroes who have recognizable villains, like multiple villains, or a really good Rogues Gallery. For the most part, outside of that, they might have one good or recognizable villain. And it's just because it's hard, I think, or at least they think it's hard, to make challenging, interesting villains. And, like, that might be why you see, in especially those Marvel movies, villains being just dark mirror versions of themselves. Iron Man, all of his villains are guys in iron suits. like in different versions of Iron Man's costume. Like
That's true. Yeah.
like one is a communist, another one can make like wind, another guy can shoot cold, but it's all the same thing over and over again. So, and you'll see that trope copied throughout. I mean, look at Wonder Woman. Before they decided to really play up the whole God angle, and they made Ares one of her major villains. Her most recognizable villain was a woman who turned into a cheetah, like a cheetah woman, which is
Yes.
a cool idea. But that's the
Heard of this?
That's the one that everyone recognizes.
I think the God of War shouldn't have been in the Wonder Woman movie.
You kind of
Ruined it.
Where do you go from there?
You don't. That's the fundamental issue. Is that maybe it's not a fundamental issue, but I think they aim too high. Like there seems to be a mentality. Maybe it's a Warner Brothers thing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the mentality's back in like golden age of cinema. Movies are a big deal.
Yeah.
It's got to be the big villain. Who's the biggest villain
Right.
in the movie? We have to have the biggest possible villain. We've got to have Zod and Superman.
Yeah.
We can't just have Luthor. Why? He doesn't have any superpowers.
Oh, when Superman and Batman team up, what are they going to fight? Doomsday. Like,
we've got to get that Doomsday in there.
yeah, like,
Boys, what do we got?
start
Can't
small.
just be Luthor.
You're going to make more of these things. I mean, but that's the kitchen sink mentality. That's like, we don't know if we're going to get another shot, and also we don't have enough faith in the property.
It's terrible because the best villains are all vastly less powerful, on DC side I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Vastly less powerful than the heroes. And it was the dumbest thing ever was Justice League bringing in this clown. For a start, even going for their cosmic stuff was the bad move because Marvel's doing that.
Yes.
And no matter what, even if Infinity War was disappointing and Thanos wasn't interesting, that would be a tough. Like you wouldn't if Marvel failed, then oh no, we're doing the wrong thing. The market's wrong.
Yeah.
Audiences aren't going to. But if Marvel succeeds, oh god, we've got to follow that.
Yeah.
Huge problem. They're doing it wrong. What it should have been is a team up movie
Right.
of like the villains and the heroes.
Yeah.
And these vastly less powerful villains against these powerful heroes, and yet they find a way
Right.
to challenge these heroes and vex them, like the Gwen Stacy thing with the you can't save them both.
Yes.
That's a classic villain move.
That is the sadistic villain choice. Yes, which I think is kind of dead at this point. I remember, I think in Spider-Man the movie from 2002, when Green Goblin says, I'm gonna make you make a choice. He says it out loud, like he acknowledges he's making the trope. I feel like okay, well you're kind of done with this. You can't do it again, but they do it constantly. But I would take that at that point with Justice League especially. Just
there's other ways.
Well, you don't need to have it be quite so on the nose.
People think that DC should have set up their movies like Marvel did with individual. I argue against that completely.
Really?
I think they should have gone Justice League instantly, because Marvel had already set up the atmosphere that people are ready for superhero team-up movies.
Yeah.
They don't want 5 or 6 years of solo movies to build up to something, because it'll be over by then. And DC have a unique advantage in that their main heroes, the ones that would be in the Justice League, need no introduction.
That's a great point.
Superman and Batman don't anyway.
Yeah,
Wonder Woman maybe, I don't know, but Superman and Batman, the two main ones.
Yeah. You don't need solo movies for them. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Exactly. And they did that with Ben Affleck's Batman. He's just there in the Superman world. You didn't need to introduce him, really.
Yeah, you don't see. He never gets like a solo adventure that establishes who this character is and what his motivations are. Because at this point, we get it. Although I will say, when Batman vs Superman opens, they do show you his origin again. Like they show you the Wayne's dying, which is like
they do. Mistake. Shouldn't have.
Like what? We all get it. Just like and you've heard. I don't want to get into a whole like let's compare Marvel and DC because it makes people crazy.
No doubt a dead horse by now.
Certainly, but
I haven't beaten that horse.
Right, exactly. No, we haven't heard the Bard's opinion about that. But I will say, if in keeping with what you were saying about getting a vastly depowered villain to be more challenging to your hero, did you see Spider-Man: Homecoming?
Yeah, it's a good film.
They picked the Vulture.
Yeah, wonderful.
Who's often overlooked. Usually he's a doddering old man, but in this case, just like a dad. But still, he's He's a vastly underpowered compared to Spider-Man character. His motivations are intimate and personal, and
Wonderful pathos out of that
right,
villain.
and it makes for a much more interesting adventure that has, the city's not going to blow up. There's not a sky laser that's going to invade the Earth. But instead, it's just like, will he make it to the homecoming dance? And will this plane crash or not? And that's like, those are the major central conflicts. And it's kind of
beautiful.
cool. Like, that's, and it's so mature of them to know. And also, the other thing, of course, is we didn't show you Spider-Man's origin, because Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, everybody knows those origins.
That's right.
We're good.
Spider-Man is probably the one Marvel hero that I can think of that wouldn't need an introduction to the broadest audience.
And they knew that. So when they made Civil War, they're like, just put him in, and everyone gets it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's great.
I agree.
It was a wonderful film. It's like, you need pathos in your villains.
Right.
If you can do things where they're these giant inhuman monoliths, and that's okay, but there has to be something else going on. If you're going to have a villain, firstly, they should be the focus, not the hero. I think in this context. That's why if you're going to do the Justice League movie, have all the origins and all of the interesting, focus, all the character stuff be on these villains. Because they're the ones who are going uphill against the hero.
Right.
Okay? I mean, and I think the least challengeable hero that I can think of, so I'm skimming off the top most mainstream here, the least challengeable hero power-wise is probably the Flash.
Because he's
the...
Yeah.
What are they going to do? A guy that's just as fast and a guy that's faster than him. I like the two.
That's all they can do.
If they do a Flash movie, you know it's going to be that yellow version or the other yellow version.
Yeah, it's going to be Thawne. I mean, like, what's so funny is Flash has...
It sucks.
Flash has one of the few DC rogues that all get together. Like, most of his villains all have a team called the Rogues, and they are interesting villains. It wasn't until they, like, reinvigorated the Flash franchise in the early 2000s that they finally, like, really pushed the Yellow Flash. But what they could have done...
I'm sure it's a fine story, but on the surface, it's just a guy with the same powers.
Well, it's frustrating because not only is it a guy with the same powers, but he also goes back in time, and he's sadistic, and so, like, every story that has him in it is the most downer story. Like, there's no joy that can be derived because it's always the most raised stakes. But like, but if Flash were to fight the Mirror Master, who can open portals to the mirror dimension, like that's silly and fun. The prankster, there's a lot
if I was to make like a Flash movie now, okay, I would put Captain Boomerang in it, and only Captain Boomerang. Because, well, A, he's one I know. B, he's vastly, vastly less powerful than the Flash.
Yep.
But C, he can challenge the Flash as well. Now, I don't know the characters very well, obviously. But this, like, the movie Flash, when you watch Justice League, he's not experienced. He says, I've never been in a battle.
Exactly.
All I've done is push people and run away.
Yeah.
And I think they've already wasted Captain Boomerang in Suicide Squad, which also had to have some major world threat, blue laser villain.
You can't just
instead of. It should have just been the Joker. I think everyone knows it.
Yeah.
There's a huge problem in Gotham. The Joker's up to this. Batman's not there. Crisis hour. There's a lockdown area. Maybe there's poison or something. Whatever reason, manipulate it so that it's these ragtag fools against the really experienced villain who challenges Batman regularly.
Right. It takes six of them to do what Batman can do. That's yeah. And they might not be able to do it. Like that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of them is Harley Quinn, so there's like conflict in there already. She's shoehorned in for popularity.
Very much so, and she's the only one who survived. They're gonna.
She's not popular for no reason.
Oh no, that's very true.
So anyway.
Yeah.
Captain Boomerang.
I love that.
I had a train of thought. Like, Captain Boomerang could be so simple. He could be a guy who wants to do crimes in whatever city the Flash lives in. I don't even know it. Is it Star City or
it's Central City?
In Central City, but there's this huge problem. There's this superhero. It's the Flash.
Yeah.
He's really fast. So what's Captain Boomerang going to do? Well, for a start, he's Australian, so he's probably an ex-military guy or a hunter or something like that. So he'll beat him. He'll challenge him tactically. Okay, he'll probably watch footage of the Flash and figure him out. He knows he's a kid who doesn't think about things.
Right.
You could even like Watchmen an encounter between them. Like imagine Boomerang's he's like on a rooftop or somewhere, he's about to break in, and like clockwork, bang, the Flash appears. Aha, I've got you now, Boomerang. What are you gonna do? Throw a boomerang at me?
Yeah.
And Boomerang could say, mate, I threw it 10 seconds ago. Get half a beat, and then the Flash takes a boomerang in the back of the head and is knocked out, and Captain Boomerang gets away. 2 or 3 times have him beat the Flash like that. And the point of the film, theoretically, I know this isn't a great premise for a film, would be the Flash learning to maybe that not his powers aren't enough, even though they're really amazing. It's like he's got to be aware, he's got to think, he's got to know his opponent. He can't just trust, I'm super fast, I'll handle this. What's he got, boomerangs?
Right. No, it's true.
You know, he learned something about being a hero and carrying the weight that he takes on as a superhero.
Yeah.
Because this vastly underpowered person
Just making him look like a fool.
Yeah, able to undermine him completely. There's a theme there.
Yeah.
And no doubt there's something interesting about Captain Boomerang we could do as well. Have some
sure.
pathos.
Yeah, give him, like, I mean, well, you know, if you're Hollywood, like,
Make
give him a kid, make the kid sad, you know. That's usually
what
how
they
they
did
do.
with a Sandman in the third.
Oh my god, yeah. That's
a classic example of he should have been the only villain.
Right. Oh, and you know it was. That's unfortunately that was another situation where they're like, okay, well, I want to tell this intimate story about this like sad man who also turns into sand, and they were like, yeah, but we can't sell too many toys of Sandman. We got to get Venom in there. We got to make it like we got to up the stakes, and it gets complicated, and the bottom completely falls out from under it.
Yeah, it does. You can't have nice things.
Not often.
The superheroes, they're too popular to have good movies these days.
That is so insightful, and it's so depressing at the same time.
Unless there's like some real bravery and some real confidence shown by, I guess, who's holding the strings in the people who's making the stuff. Because Homecoming is a great example.
Yeah. And
I believe this upcoming Spider-Man film looks like it might be another good one.
I don't think.
Right. I don't think we're going to see that out of DC at all. Even with what's his name, James Gunn.
Directing
Suicide Squad 2.
And I think it's going to be like a reboot of Suicide Squad, so they're going to do it all over again.
Are we? Oh no, that's Thunderbolts. I was going to say, are we going to get Troll? Because I love this character, Troll.
Troll.
I think her name's Troll. This is embarrassing. Is it Troll?
I'm not sure.
I don't know.
From the Suicide Squad?
No, from Thunderbolts, like the Marvel equivalent. Sometimes I get Marvel and DC confused.
Well, that's fair.
My friend the Elf. Hang on. We're going to Google it. Edit this out. Yeah, that's Troll.
Yeah, there is.
Gets around in Yeti skin or some nonsense.
Wow.
He's a Thor character, I think.
You are completely right. I have no familiarity with Troll.
She looks like exactly my kind of character. Very silly.
Yes.
But,
But wields an axe and
that sort of thing.
Yeah.
You know me? Now, I'm all about that. That if I could see something like that on screen, it might not be good, but I know I'd like it.
You'll take it.
I liked the Suicide Squad movie, and it's terrible.
Yes.
I famously think Deathstalker is unironically good.
Oh, you like Deathstalker.
I legitimately like Deathstalker. I don't like it ironically, and I don't like it because it's so bad it's funny, although it is. It's all of these things. It's garbage.
But you also enjoy, like, the earnestness of it, the fact that they're trying to do something.
I think it's a tremendous example of sword and sorcery at that time, the state of sword and sorcery
That's
at that
fair.
time, the way the fantastic imagination was. It's got one of the all-time great performances of a sorcerer in film across all of sword and sorcery, for all of fantasy film. This is the classic evil sorcerer, like archetypal. You could say this of Thulsa Doom, played by James Earl Jones in Conan the Barbarian, but even he is too subversive. This character, you imagine evil sorcerer in the 80s.
Yes.
He's it. Munkar, his name is. Munkar is that, and he's played exactly like that in the most generic way. And he's a perfect example. I can't think of a better one. Well, I probably could if
we challenged you.
If I wasn't currently thinking about Deathstalker.
Right.
But I've got Deathstalker on the brain. It's a terrible movie.
Right.
but it's got some good scenes. It is less than the sum of its parts.
Well, it does that
That's how I
thing.
visually.
That's fair, because it does that thing that you couldn't do anymore, where it has that grit, and it I don't know. I'm not a sword and sorcery kind of guy, but I do recognize genre when I see it. And when it comes to sword and sorcery, the only time you can really make it for me is in the 70s and 80s, because
Yeah.
it needs film grain. There needs to be dirt and dust everywhere. People
There's
need to
a
be
certain-
hungry and tired while making it. There just needs to be this raw humanity associated with it for me.
Yes.
Like it looks like it was a bitch to make Conan. It looks like
Oh.
Deathstalker, like no one was happy making that movie. And it needs to feel like that, because that's the era you're portraying. It's this era that never existed, that is not fair. It's almost Lovecraftian in the fact that the world doesn't care about you, but if you know the right tricks, you can manipulate the natural forces of the earth. Like, for me, that's fascinating. I don't know if it but I'm a comic book kid, so you know how that is. But
Yeah.
but
No,
yeah,
it's there's a mean spiritedness
exactly. Thank you.
to Deathstalker that, while it doesn't really reflect maybe like the core sword and sorcery tales,
Sure.
the assumptions about those tales that are disseminated in society, it captures that feeling, that
Yeah.
the world is this terrible, brutal place,
Right.
and it's and the fact that the movie's awful maybe reinforces that.
That's
'cause
fair.
You
Yeah.
watch it and you think, oh no, God.
Yeah. It's a
Deathstalker
place.
2 is a fantastic movie. I recommend Deathstalker 2 to anybody.
And by the way, the best title reveal I've ever seen in a movie.
That's right.
Because it's
I'll
not
have my revenge
and
and
Deathstalker
Deathstalker
2.
2.
Oh my god. How great. What a perfect delivery.
It's a great film.
Yeah. It's for me, it's like, it's got to be a world you don't want to live in.
Yeah,
You know?
but full of characters that you would love to be.
Right. Yeah. Well, because the only way I could survive is if I was that person.
That's why characters like Conan the Barbarian Hero are such a great ideal, because they thrive in that world under their own power. That's the fantasy of these characters is, gee, I wish I had the capacity to affect the world and thrive in the world just under my own power, that I don't need society, or I don't need to conform or have a stake in other people. I don't need to be rescued. I'm not dependent. And I can change the world and affect the world, not because I have permission to, or not because I'm a chosen one, or not because I have special powers, just because I recognize that I have those capacities already as a human being
You can feel,
and as an individual.
You can feel
Yeah.
the He-Man exclamation, "I have the power," from that description. Just the
Yeah.
fact, I was actually watching a documentary about like toys the other day, and it was one of the chapters was about He-Man and the Masters of the Universe action figures in the show that came from it, and how I don't know how, I'm sure you know all about this as well, but like the idea that like the He-Man figures were made, and then they were like, okay, we have to also create like a universe around the toys. And so the first thing they did was make a Marvel comic about it, and that was actual sword and sorcery. There was no Prince Adam, there was no secret identity or like goofiness, and one of the problems that the executives saw were like, well, if the toys are rated for children who can't read, then how are they going to enjoy the comic book? And they're like, oh, well, that's because we're working on this cartoon show that we hastily put together immediately following this meeting. And one of the market research recognitions was children want power. And I don't think that actually is just limited to children. I think it's just, that's a human trait. Everyone wants the power. And it's like, what does the power mean? Like, it's just, no, they want power to affect their environments. And children are testing those fences all the time. And that's, I think, why He-Man is wound up being so effective, even though there were a bazillion other things coming out at the exact same time that were all jockeying for the public eye and for children's attention. And it's all boiled down to He-Man yelling, "I have the power." And being like you're me, you know, I'm your ride along character. You're supposed to see me and see yourself in me. And so when you're playing He-Man, you say, I have this power. I can affect change in my environment and everything. So yeah, it was just an interesting thing you said. Got me.
Fascinatingly enough, in a comparison between like classic barbarian heroes such as Conan, I just compare Conan to He-Man.
Yeah.
He-Man has this power, but he has it on condition.
Right.
He has to pay obeisance to Grayskull.
Yeah.
He only has his power when he held aloft his magic sword and said,
I have the power.
by the power of Grayskull.
Yeah.
You know, he has to, there's a ritual that he has to perform before he gets his power.
Yeah.
He doesn't have true freedom.
No.
This is the same thing with Red Sonja. You know, she doesn't have the truth of freedom either, although she is a relatively fantastically free character as far as I know. And I never read the old Red Sonja comics until recently.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, no, I never did. I read the book series. I have a series of books, and that's my Red Sonja.
That makes more sense. I mean, like, I think the comic did a good job of launching Red Sonja into the public eye, along with the movie. But, you know, the movie, I don't know. I was not a big fan of the movie, but...
No, neither am I.
But
it's a series of situations where Sonja gets rescued by Conan,
which is
or
not
Kalidor.
Kalidor, not Conan.
Not Conan.
By the way, why didn't they? I mean, like, was it really not the same studio? Just make it Conan. Like, just give us what we want, people.
There was some.
Ironically enough, they have Conan and Red Sonja have been like the rights, the comic book rights to those characters have shifted so often over the last 20 years. Like Conan was with Marvel, and then it went with Dark Horse or Dynamite or something. And Red Sonja used to be with Marvel, and it's just swap back and forth. So they never quite got that sweet spot where you can finally see Red Sonja and Conan share an adventure together.
Hang on a minute. Well, they did share adventures many times.
Yes, they have.
So,
they exist in. Don't they normally exist in the same universe?
Yes, they do. They definitely do. Certainly.
So
it says at the start of every book, in the same world, the self-same lands, one of the few worthy swords to match Conan's was that of Red Sonja.
Now,
hang on. Look, I have a giant Red Sonja statue here that I'm going to unbox.
Oh, excellent!
Spoilers.
Oh, hell yeah, yeah! I can't wait.
Let me have a look at my the box here and see if there's like a trademark or brand.
Oh, that'd be great.
I don't know who has it nowadays. Like,
I think, yeah, I don't know who owns Red Sonja or who's licensing her now.
No, I don't see it. It's probably Dynamite, though. My memory says Dynamite.
Yeah.
It might have changed since this statue was made.
Oh, that's probably true. Let's see.
But whatever. Spoilers. That's what I'm doing next.
Is she as big as the Conan one you have, or is it...
Yes.
Oh,
yes, it's cool. a large figure of Sonja as companion to my Conan statue.
That's fantastic. Man, I can't wait for that.
Neither can I.
Yeah, right. Now that kills me, man. You like one of your basic things about unboxings. You do not look like you don't open them until it's on camera. So it'll just sit there.
Do people open them off camera?
I honestly don't know. We're not really big on boxes.
Surely they
here,
don't.
But
surely they don't, because you see people take the wrapping off.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and you know what it is, though? You make a whole your whole thing is the experience and the journey you take through the unboxing, whereas most folk just open the box and they go, well, there it is. It's basically like a wish fulfillment, like you're me and we're both opening the box together, whereas you take someone on a journey through the story of the piece.
With figures, I open the figure. Well, with everything now, actually, I open the thing.
Yeah.
I have a little. You get some like initial reaction to it, but then I go away and study it for a while.
Sure.
And then I'll formulate what I think, which is really tough sometimes. Sometimes it takes a long time occasionally, because like especially with Medusa, I had enormous trouble because I'd be nearly finished, and then I'd think, no, I don't really think that anymore. My ideas would change.
Yeah.
With Medusa, and it took a long time to make. I think it was like nearly a year, and the last one was nearly a year, but that's not the reason it took so long. Sorry about that, anyone who was waiting for me to return, by the way. Should they be listening?
Yeah.
Assuming that this doesn't get edited out.
Right.
It takes a while, like longer than it should normally, which is why I'm very leery of trying to go professional with this, because I don't want to get caught in the loop where I have to put content out.
Oh no, that is That's a surefire way to lose interest. Like, you're going to be sick of it. You're going to be doing it for all the wrong. You're doing it for the wrong reasons, and you don't want to. And it stops being fun. I assume.
Start
I
putting
assume
clickbait titles on.
Right. Well, that's a whole other aspect of the business that's not fun or pretty. But
You're already there. So.
Yeah.
I saw that D&D title.
I'm sorry.
I still absorb problem. Occasionally people I know will say, "Why do you say it's the best version?" And I say, "I didn't say that."
No, you didn't say it. I
It's
could
the
alter
title.
it at this point. It's just the title.
There's a question mark on the title.
Yeah,
it doesn't
it's
even
a
say
rhetorical
it's
question.
an implication.
Yeah. By the way, if you haven't
Said
seen
it's
that
my
episode, it's a great conversation. You make some great postulations about like which versions are superior.
Would love to revisit. I listened to it back partly not that long ago, and I remember I was going on to launch. I was talking about like the hunting skill, and I got halfway through a point I was trying to make, and it just got lost.
Yeah.
The perils of podcasting.
It is,
Which, we're a long way from supervillains.
That's true.
Now.
That's true. But let's take it back. Is Skeletor a supervillain?
Yeah, I'd say he is. Because He-Man's the superhero.
Right, but he's so. At what point? I guess because you said power doesn't equate supervillainy, but I was gonna say because Skeletor is so ineffectual, and he's he's almost like a parody of a villain.
Now remember, early on I said it doesn't matter if you succeed
Exactly.
or how successful you are.
You just have to challenge the hero.
He challenges He-Man.
Yeah, and that's all he needs to do.
That's it. Well, if we apply the same idea regarding superheroes being like overarching, is a supervillain a threat to everybody? If a superhero might be considered a savior to everybody in the ideal archetype,
right?
Is a supervillain a threat to everybody?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Maybe.
I have to assume so. I think it's that if we're going to use the same criteria, like the supervillain exists because he is in opposition to the superhero, and the superhero is a superhero because their interests are not selfish and they are overarching, then that means that the villain's goals must be in opposition to the hero, and as such, the villain's plan must also be overarching and affect the world, so to speak, or at least the city or a larger of concerns. It's not that I think that's also why you get more interesting, but arguably like more difficult to write stories where the supervillain's like, I'm going to affect the hero personally, as opposed to I'm going to blow up the city or I'm going to poison.
I don't think it holds. Not on an archetypal level.
No, I think you're right.
Superman might well solve any problem. He'll do the cat out of the tree.
Yeah.
And I guess Lex Luthor is famous for stealing cakes at one point. But I don't think I don't think supervillains in general will stoop to the lowest crime.
No.
They might, but individuals might, but I don't think you can say it on the archetype.
No.
Supervillains, they're a response. See, this is why I think underpowered villains are the key, is because they are sort of returning to an earlier point, because superheroes disrupt normality.
Exactly.
They're like a response of normality to this disruption.
Yeah.
So they're much more ordinary than the hero. The best ones, like the Joker, is much more ordinary than Batman is in a certain sense. He doesn't have all of the resources or the power. The only thing he's really obsessed with, seemingly, is the Batman.
Exactly. Which is why I think people are so quick to use that character, but also why it's so unrewarding when they try to make the Joker something other than a guy who's screwed up or a guy who has clown makeup on who's fighting Batman.
Luther's the same.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think he would be as deadly a villain if Superman wasn't there to sharpen him.
I think, and it's explored in a multitude of stories, that if there were no Superman, Lex Luthor would be the hero.
Yeah.
Of course, there's a great story, Superman Secret Origin, I think. It's by Jeff Johns, but it's basically like a retelling of his origin for the umpteenth time. And that's another, by the way, whole exploration. I mentioned this in an earlier show on another unrelated thing, where I'm like, the most successful Superman stories are retellings of his origin, and it's harder and harder to find like enduring, long-lasting, like revisit all the time stories about Superman where he's just on an adventure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of like that's something that's worth exploring. I don't know about today, but certainly it's weird. Like I was like, why is that? Why is that so? Why is it so true?
Maybe because he's harder to challenge.
That's exactly right. Well, it's why
Like in a discrete adventure, like you can have like a powerful thing comes up, and will he overcome this challenge?
Yeah,
And it doesn't have to get psychological. It can just be an adventure.
sure.
I think that's easier to do with less monolithically powerful heroes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, you could do that with Green
Otherwise,
Arrow
Dragon Ball is terrible because it it. I saw some of it back in the day, and I remember thinking, this is when I was young.
yeah.
I remember thinking, this is just a repeating cycle of power smashing against power.
Yes.
And the solution is always for the hero just to get more powerful
Get more
or
power.
be more powerful.
Yeah.
And then a more powerful villain shows up. It's much worse than Superman for that.
Oh yeah. Well,
You know,
because
I'm sure there's nuance in there, and I'm sure some Dragon Ball fans can tell me all about it.
Oh, and
but
they
it's
will. But
well, I hope so because it's interesting, but it's not on the surface. Like you don't see it.
no.
I think I watched one of the early-ish seasons of Dragon Ball Z
Mhm.
when I was young, around when Frieza shows up.
Yeah, I got up to Frieza, and I was like, all right, well, I can't do this anymore.
That's when I started noticing. I was like, this is just the more powerful guy because he goes through like 8 forms or however many
Yep,
forms.
exactly. But there was never a time when like someone who isn't powerful challenges Goku. It's always somebody who's more powerful and it's off the scale, and we got to find.
Well, there should be such a time.
Yeah, I would love that. That
And
actually would be
interestingly
interesting.
enough, I don't think Goku's a superhero.
No, I don't think so either, because I don't really know what his motivation is, but
He seems to just have he's very monastic as far as I can tell, in that
Yeah.
his goal is perfecting himself.
right. Yeah, but not to
And
make the world better or
his-
safer. It's just to be the best.
Yeah. And his arch rival Vegeta seems to be just, no, I will be that. No, he just wants to oppose Goku.
Yeah.
He wouldn't care if Goku wasn't there.
Oh,
He's
no.
Luther.
Yeah, Frieza
He's not vastly less powerful.
or Vegeta. I see Vegeta as more like he is the opposition. He is the adversary. Like if there was no Goku, he'd kill himself. Because there's nothing left for him to do. Like my motivations are found in my opposition to you. Whereas Luther, I think it's funny actually. Although that might be more true than I originally thought. The idea that if there were no Superman, that Luther would say, "Oh, finally, I've achieved my goal," and then realize that he has nothing. Like that his desires are empty now because all he did was oppose Superman.
You don't need an antithesis if there's no thesis.
Right. Exactly.
And as that definition of an antithesis, the textbook example would be a supervillain who's vastly less powerful than the hero.
Yeah. Which
Because
we've established is usually more interesting, and that's fair. Yeah.
Well, there has to be something else. It's like Thanos was very interesting in Infinity War, but it wasn't because he was powerful.
No.
And if he was only powerful, he'd be boring.
He
Because
usually
Steppenwolf sucked. Steppenwolf was only powerful. And when I watched that movie, all right,
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, but is the only reason they resurrect Superman
to punch
because
Steppenwolf.
he's the only guy who can punch Steppenwolf hard
Oh,
enough.
Steppenwolf! It goes even further than that. Steppenwolf doesn't come to Earth until he finds out that there isn't someone more powerful than him to punch him. Like when he finds out there isn't a Superman, that's when he's coming, and it's like, ugh. And so we have to bring Superman back. Now that being said, as I understand it, there was another like plot about Superman but I think they couldn't change so much that those were the motivations for bringing back Superman and how Steppenwolf shows up.
Yeah.
Steppenwolf might be one of the worst villains in a superhero movie I've ever seen, and I've seen Tank Girl.
Man, I like Tank Girl.
I like Tank Girl too, but it's just Malcolm McDowell with a bionic hand.
Yeah.
I was just watching Star Trek Generations the other day, and I'm like, you're just doing the same character you were doing in Tank Girl, man. God damn it. Now I'm like, now I want to watch Tank Girl. What am I doing here? But yeah, no, Steppenwolf sucks. And Thanos is interesting because I feel like the people behind the MCU are going like, okay, when we get Thanos in here, he had better be interesting because if you look at him in the comics, when he first comes up, he is just really powerful, and he wants and he worships death. Like, he loves death, which is,
They got rid of that.
they sure did. And much to his benefit, because while it might work in the comics, this works better in the movie. And
Oh yeah.
he's certainly more humanized in this movie than he ever was in the comics.
It works wonderfully.
It does.
He's a interesting.
Yeah, he's not quite the
Great
comic
pathos.
Thanos, but he's a character at the very least. You might even argue that Thanos is the protagonist of Infinity War, because there's too many characters in Infinity War for you to like pin down who is the hero of Infinity War. And it's like, well, if you look at it from Thanos' point of view, then it's Thanos. But if you look at it from the hero's point of view, like, who is the ride along character? Whose journey are we going on? I guess it's Iron Man. But but you could argue,
Yeah.
but you could argue for everybody at that point, because everybody shares equal screen time.
Protagonist doesn't just mean good guy.
Right. It just means the character whose journey we're following.
Actually, protagonist. There's a wonderful example. If anyone plays Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, it's there's a character career you can have called protagonist.
Really?
And what a protagonist is that they pick fights in bars for money. Like you'll if you've got a problem with someone, you'll tell this protagonist.
Yeah.
And you'll say, right, that guy. It's a person who gets things happening.
Right.
Is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And if you look at it from that perspective, Thanos is the get things happening guy
definitely
in Infinity War.
Yeah.
You know? None of that exists beforehand. He's not very well set up.
No.
But he didn't need it ultimately.
Yeah, it turns out that he was strong enough as a character, to just introduce pretty much, because you see him, he shows up in Guardians, but he says a couple of pithy things, but you don't get anything out of him. And the rest of the time, he's either turning over his shoulder or he's grabbing gloves. Like, there's nothing that says, like, the audience who likes comics or who read comics or who's a big fan of Thanos, like, they inform their own understandings of what's happening in those scenes because they have the baggage. And the filmmakers are going, yeah, but everyone else hasn't read those comics and knows nothing about him. And we need to make him not only introduced in this movie, but also introduce his motivations and make him capable and succeed. And it's yeah.
They might not have set him up directly, but they set up a lot of material to work with.
Yeah, it's making me. I hope he doesn't die. But
who cares? It doesn't matter. In the movie universe, he can die.
Well, Loki, for example, like Loki, I think everyone kind of agreed, like, by and large, in terms of going to see these movies, everybody kind of liked Loki, and it's just because Loki actually, he doesn't die, so he's allowed to do more things that inform his character, as opposed to, like, wouldn't it have been interesting? This is me just fanboying, but, like, I really liked Iron Man 2. But not for the Whiplash guy, but rather for Justin Hammer, the, like, anti-Tony Stark character, like the.
I haven't seen Iron Man 2.
Oh man, well, it's not great, but basically, oh crap, what is his name? Sam Rockwell plays like a kind of like cracked mirror, phony version of Tony Stark. He's like, I'm a weapons manufacturer too, but everything about him is fake.
Sounds good.
And that's really interesting and fun. And he's one of the best Iron Man villains in the entire, like, franchise, and he only gets the one movie, and we don't get to see him anymore. And it's like, man, I would love to see where he ends up after this, but we never get there. Anyway. I
went straight to 3. A movie not being very good is no obstacle to me enjoying it.
Well, that's Deathstalker, but.
Oh yeah.
What'd you think of Iron Man 3? Just out of curiosity.
I loved it.
Really?
Well, to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed the Mandarin.
Yeah.
I didn't enjoy Tony Stark's parts, and I didn't enjoy the real villain. I liked the Mandarin, and I liked the fact that he was just a sham.
Really? Yeah,
I thought that was really good.
That's the point of contention. Like, most folk either say they hated the Mandarin because of the twist, or they like the movie because of that twist, because it was actually, like, trying to do something different.
It was trying to do something different, but it can also come back. I think the Mandarin, when he's in, like, full character, was such a cryptic
Yeah.
guy, like because they couldn't do the Ming the Merciless copycat
No,
character.
they couldn't do
anymore.
that. Yeah.
You can't
Those
do
days
that
are
anymore.
over.
Yeah,
Unless
you
you're
can't
doing like a
cast Christopher Lee as a Asian supervillain anymore.
unless you were doing like a Black Dynamite version of Iron Man, you can't get away with doing the Mandarin the way he was. So
Yeah, but so they got this really cryptic, weird guy who no one can understand.
yes.
All right, that's really good. I would love to see him return and be the Mandarin fully.
Right.
Like he's an actor, right? Maybe he's gone a little mad. Maybe he starts being the Mandarin for real.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the only difference is one is an act and the other is all the components are still there.
Exactly. That'd be
You
cool.
know?
I'm down for that.
That's one way of doing it anyway.
Exactly.
Or maybe if you're really lame, you could say he's the Mandarin all along and lost his memory.
Oh, that's true. They actually
That sucks.
one of the things
There was like a short
yeah.
film, wasn't there, with the Mandarin being taken away by somebody?
There
from prison?
was. Oh no, they in the short. Marvel doesn't do these anymore, but they used to, and they were actually kind of fun. They were called one shots. Marvel did this little like short movie where actually, and by the way, the Sam Rockwell character's in that movie too. But what was it? Yeah, no. It turns out there really is a real Mandarin, and he was offended by the Trevor Slattery, Ben Kingsley character's performance of him, and so the real Mandarin arranges for his prison break to bring him to the Mandarin, so Mandarin can presumably kill him.
Yeah, that's lame.
Yeah.
Kill him's lame. Because Kingsley was too good.
I agree. Well, and it's great because if you loved the performance of the Mandarin, he's doing a great job. But if you also loved the dual performance of he's a really convincing real Mandarin, and then he's a really convincing fake Mandarin, like that's great too. Like that's Kingsley when he's actually given material, or as opposed to Blood Rain. But if you've never seen Blood Rain, by the way,
I haven't.
there's a
Are
video.
you recommending Blood Rain?
Oh no! No! But it's a yeah. He apparently he took that job because he always wanted to be a vampire.
Keen.
So he plays a vampire in that. But you know,
Oh, there's worse reasons.
that's true. I mean, you know, what was it? That's Chris Lee's career practically.
Almost. If you want to say he's typecast, then yes.
Yeah, I mean, well, anyway, I don't want to get into Star Wars. I was going to say the only reason why he's Count Dooku is because Lucas is making a Count Dracula joke. So,
Yeah.
Anyway.
He was up for it.
Oh yeah. Oh, he was happy to do it.
Highlight of the movie too.
It was very. I found it to be hammy, but like welcome in those movies. I'm like, all right,
Yeah.
go for it. He's having a good time. Someone's enjoying these things.
Always happy to see Christopher Lee.
He's great every time.
is.
That was
Was.
just
Is.
as a geeky question. Chris Lee, as you probably know, huge Lord of the Rings fan. Read them every Christmas. Always wanted to play Gandalf. Never gets to, and instead plays Saruman. How do you think he should have gotten the Gandalf job, or do you think he was a better Saruman?
I think he was a better Saruman.
I agree.
Because there's something very arch and sinister about Christopher Lee.
Right?
Just in the way he looks. Some actors just have a certain look that lends them toward things. Just like Sylvester Stallone has a very sympathetic face.
He really
very
does.
Downtrodden. That's why he's perfect for that. So he's not like monolith Arnold Schwarzenegger.
No,
like,
Arnold
compare
could not
those
have.
two.
Yeah, Arnold could not have played
Arnold-
Rocky.
There's nothing of the underdog. There's nothing sympathetic
No.
about Schwarzenegger. But there is with him. And so with Christopher Lee, there is something very arch and mysterious
Yeah.
about him.
Yeah.
Arch. But arch
Oh.
villain.
Hey.
That makes me think. Arch villain. You don't hear the word arch hero.
No. But
I wonder why.
What would that? Oh,
It sounds strange, but only because it's not used.
right.
Is an arch villain the same as a super villain?
Well, I don't
think
even
so.
hear arch villain usually. I hear the arch nemesis, but
Yeah.
it means it's synonymous with supervillain.
It's synonymous in common parlance. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you wanted to get deeper into it,
Exactly.
you'd need. If you want to get really specific,
Well,
it's
and
worth having.
when you get into like
Specific.
meta superhero or meta like stuff like the Venture Brothers, they talk about arching as a vocation.
We could have been talking about Friday the 13th.
I know you're right. I'm sorry.
Imagine where that could have For anyone out there who's wondering, we had basically a choice of two topics:
Yep.
super villains or Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th. And
I actually think that'd be an interesting conversation
Yeah.
because the way I wanted to approach that was
Yep.
through the hero motifs.
Oh.
What kind of heroic archetype is the final girl? Because the slasher villain has an antithesis, right?
Right.
Or it's not an antithesis, so to speak, but it's a well, I guess maybe it is. Well, we could explore the idea
Okay.
where of the so-called final girl
Yes.
who ultimately defeats them via surviving, sometimes by slaying them, but they often come back.
Exactly. So it's never
But-
it's never really that. Like they never do kill them.
yeah.
Because, you know.
So that's a topic I'd like to explore. What kind of how that character relates to heroism, and do they come into hero status by their encounter with a monstrous force?
I mean, I'd have to
Be it
assume
Jason
that's
or
true. It's just
Michael Myers
yeah.
or whatever. I love the recent Halloween, by the way. I thought that was a
I didn't
very
get a
good
chance to see it yet, but I heard it's
I
excellent.
recommend it. I recommend.
Very different. You know, like I remember. Did you ever see Halloween H2O?
I love that film.
Now, it also deals with Jamie Lee Curtis's character returning and dealing with Michael, but two drastically divergent approaches to that concept. That H2O and Halloween.
Very much. They are very much of the times they were made. Both of those films, I believe.
Yeah.
The 90s were different.
Yeah. Well, that's that's true.
H2O isn't very good, but I think it was. Well, I say it's not very good. I think it's good, but I don't think it's of the standard of the most recent one.
I can imagine. Well, I'm sure the motivations for making them were very different.
Oh yeah.
You know, it was H2O was entirely a cash grab, whereas this one, I think someone had an actual idea. And I know that Carpenter came back for at least some.
He did the soundtrack.
He did the soundtrack,
It's phenomenal.
Which is what he does now, apparently. Which is
The soundtrack is wonderful. It's a legitimate, good soundtrack that you remember.
That's cool
and
because
not one that you forget.
as you might know, John Carpenter doesn't really believe in soundtracks. Like he's kind of like the guy who says music should be like wallpaper. Like you don't even notice it's really there, but I recognize that it's important for the movie. I don't agree with him, but
I don't agree with. Well, so often it is that way, but ironically, his soundtracks are really memorable.
well, that's what I'm saying. Like, well, especially if you think of like his greatest works, like The Thing, or
yeah. His soundtracks are in the short list conversation for best ever, right up there with the Conan soundtrack by Basil Poledouris and Conan the Destroyer, which isn't as good as the first one, but it's good.
Yeah.
In there with Ennio Morricone,
Oh yeah.
who did Red Sonja's soundtrack.
Did he
incidentally.
really? Okay.
That's what I think of. For some reason, I think of that instead of like the Western one.
Right,
I believe he did.
Ennio Morricone, by the way, for those who are listening, is like a celebrated spaghetti western musical director and
You've heard his work and you know
composer.
it, even if
Exactly.
all you got to do is say ooh, ooh, ooh.
That's him.
Wow, 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 hey, and you know it.
Yeah. He also did. I think he did some music for Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah, maybe.
Because Tarantino's a big, he likes old movies. Anyway, well, I think we haven't really exhausted the topic clearly because we're all over the place. But
we had a discussion.
We had
I don't
a
think
discussion.
we reached any conclusions.
No,
we reached none.
I don't know. I mean, I think we had a good. Unfortunately, not unfortunately, actually, kind of like impressively, we kind of pinned down what a supervillain is within the first 2 minutes of the episode.
Yeah, we shouldn't have done that.
should have buried the lead a little bit, but you know what? We hooked people. You know what? You're listening to this. You're a sucker. We got you. But
we certainly determine which ones we find more interesting.
Oh, definitely.
And I think a good test of that is if you watch the Aquaman film,
which I liked.
I have no desire to see it ever again.
Well,
whoa, too long.
Here's my thing about the Aquaman movie. I don't need to see it again because I've seen it probably a dozen times.
How did you see it a dozen times?
Because
it's a terrible idea.
Because it's every movie.
Oh yeah.
Like because
I've seen it is every movie.
Because I've seen every scene in that movie 6 other times in other movies I enjoy.
It even has a scene from Deathstalker 4.
Oh no! Well, I didn't see Deathstalker 4, but
Deathstalker 4 has a scene where Deathstalker and his female companion, they're in a cave, okay? And the Beastmen come, the alleged werbeasts, and they knock the rocks down, they seal the cave, and I don't remember it verbatim, But I think the Beastmen say, "We've got you now, Deathstalker." And Deathstalker says, "There's no way out of this cave." And then it immediately cuts to him and his companion riding through the woods. It's never mentioned again. The same thing happens in Aquaman, because they're in the inescapable cave.
Yep.
It cuts away, and they show back up again later.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
What is happening in this film?
Yeah.
I thought that was all right. Of course they're going to be able to get out of that cave.
Right.
These are super normal people.
Yeah, exactly. They'll just blast through the wall or whatever. But it's
Yeah. So why even have it? But in Deathstalker, it's like, oh man, why? You're thinking, oh boy, what cunning plan will Deathstalker employ to get out of this cave?
That's one of the problems when you're ever watching a movie and you know that the filmmakers are incompetent, is that anytime that actually it's great and terrible, because sometimes you're thinking you're surprised by how clever they are, and you go, wow, I didn't know you were capable of such feats. And then other times you're like, this is the part where something really interesting would happen, but instead I bet they cut, and then they do, and you're like, okay, well, here we are. But but with Aquaman, here's a question: which villain did you like better?
That's the question I was going to pose to you.
Oh, okay.
And I think it's easy to say that the Black Manta is by far the more interesting villain.
I think Black Manta had the potential to be the most interesting, and I wanted to like him more.
Yeah, me too.
But I found his dad more interesting, and like I wanted him to die and for his dad to move on. Like that would have been kind of cool.
That would have been a nice twist.
But in the comics he doesn't. I know they had significant influence over the story, which may account for why people actually enjoyed it this time. But that might be the shortcomings of the actor who played Black Manta. I don't know. I liked the guy who played the dad better. I found him more interesting, and his motivations more.
But I notice you're not saying the
Ocean Master,
the other guy. No one's saying Ocean Master, because he's equal power king of the realm.
Yeah, I mean, I will give it this. I like Patrick Wilson's performance.
I enjoyed it.
Like I bought it.
I enjoyed it.
It wasn't ridiculous, even though he looks and behaves ridiculously. I would have much rather seen a film about Black Manta, who is a mortal man rising to the challenge of the superhuman. Well, and because there is literally only 2 Aquaman villains in his rogues gallery, you will absolutely see that in Aquaman 2.
Right.
I mean, he does have other villains. I'm being hyper.
Squid Lord.
I mean, there's every
King Crab.
We saw King Crab in that movie. And
what?
In the big Lord of the Rings fight where
oh yeah,
and it's literally played by John Rhys Davies, and he's just doing his Gimli voice, and I'm like, really? You're just gonna well, you know what? I like John Rhys Davies, and I dig King Crab, so I'm in. I don't know what his real name is, but I don't care either, and I'm not gonna bother. But I enjoyed Aquaman. I think it's just like you said. I don't need to see it anymore. But that's okay because everyone saw it. So.
That's one of the movies I have no desire to see again. There's that and Cannibal Holocaust, I guess. I don't really want to see.
Well, for the same reason, or because...
No, for different reasons. It was too long and too much like Lord of the Rings, so I don't want to see Cannibal Holocaust ever again.
Exactly. I remember hearing a lot of complaints about that.
Is it Italian directors always... ripping off Tolkien?
Oh yeah. Oh, that was a great source of inspiration.
No, Cannibal Holocaust is too horrible to watch again.
Yeah. No, it is. You're absolutely right.
That's the real reason. I recommend it to people to watch once because it's a very important film. Mm-hmm. It's also an excellent movie. Right. But it is intensely unpleasant.
Right. Yeah. That's why I'm not a big Eli Roth fan. I think he enjoys. Eli Roth made House of a Thousand Corpses. The Devil's Rejects.
No, Hostel. I thought that was Rob Zombie.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Eli Roth made Hostel.
He made Hostel.
Green Inferno.
I am sorry, you're absolutely right. I don't like Rob Zombie films. I think he takes too much pleasure in the absurdly discomforting, and there's no purpose for it. It's just there to be upsetting.
I don't think Rob Zombie can be good, but in a lot of his films, I don't think he does it with any.
Finesse.
I was going to say, finesse. I was going to say class, but
yeah, you're right.
Yeah, that's not quite that. He doesn't do it with any subtlety.
No. I like Rob Zombie when he's in the band White Zombie, but outside of that...
Subtlety is not even the right word, because I like Cannibal Holocaust, and it's not subtle.
No.
But it's got finesse. You know, it's
Well, it's doing something deliberately as opposed to
Yeah.
what I think. I mean, like it. Yeah. Hmm.
and it might be as good as it is by accident, though maybe not.
That's the thing. You need to see more movies by whoever made Cannibal Holocaust. I don't remember.
The name escapes me. I keep wanting to say Ennio Morricone, but I know he didn't do it.
It was Ruggero Deodato.
Yeah, that's it. Ruggero.
But
I don't know how to pronounce Italian names correctly.
I am Italian and I have no idea. So you're in good company.
Okay.
Well, not Italian, but I'm
I often get the classic directors confused.
Mm.
I don't know. I quite often forget all of whether Lucio Fulci directed a movie or not. I know he did many of my favorites, like The Beyond and things like that. Suspiria and other some of these classic supernatural films with very surreal themes.
Right.
But Cannibal Holocaust is a wonderful film because it's part of the great found footage canon.
Right.
As well. I think it might be the originating movie.
Oh. I don't know about that. I don't know about that, but
it has a framing device, but all of the most horrible stuff is like on. Or maybe it's not all the most horrible stuff, but a lot of the stuff is on footage recovered from the jungle that was shot by these folk.
Right.
So I was going to say, like, I'd have to watch it again to be sure, but I've got
no.
Maybe I should. No.
No, don't see it again. Just read the Wikipedia on it or something. Like
I can watch selected scenes.
Yeah, pull it up on YouTube. I'm sure it'll be broken up, and you can just pick and choose.
Yeah, maybe.
But
it's an unpleasant film, and I have delicate sensibilities. Even
it's hard to believe at this point.
Despite my canon list of other films that I really like.
Exactly.
There's several other movies. Like it's not worth discussing. We'll go too far into whether or not I like the guinea pig movies or something like that, which I do. Incidentally, I thought Flower of Flesh and Blood was a very interesting thing to watch. It's a Japanese film.
Okay.
But there's not much to it, but there's something to it.
Right.
It's also quite unpleasant. It's famous. I think this is the movie that Charlie Sheen reported to the FBI for being a snuff film.
Oh.
But when you watch it on DVD or Blu-ray, heaven forbid,
you want to get it in 4K.
These effects don't hold up.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It's evident.
Right.
But when you're watching it on an 8th generation VHS bootleg, maybe.
Then you never know. Yeah, no, that's
that's
a thing that I kind of miss, that no one that is only going to die out. This is a much tamer example. But when I was a kid, the only way I ever saw aliens was through a grainy, 1,000 times watched VHS on a crappy CRT TV that maybe had 8 colors. It's really, really beat to shit. And that helped maintain this illusion that it was just so dark and hidden and part of this. I don't know. What's interesting is I got it on Blu-ray. It's still gorgeous, and even though you lose the grain, it's it's like watching a completely different movie.
There's something to be said for low fidelity.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a tremendous amount of authenticity that you
well,
lose. You can't mistake something for. It's not even about mistake. It's about the atmosphere that something might be real,
right?
I guess, or willing to buy into the illusion. But when you see something in super high definition, 4K, I guess it is these days, unless they've come up with another number, you can only see it as a presentation.
Yes, they know.
It's tough. Yeah. It's harder to invest in certain films. It's great for some other films.
Yeah.
It's like that 48 frames debate, I think it was.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
The Hobbit was shot in 40. I watched it in 48 frames, and I thought it looked very good.
I tried to see it, and none of my theaters were showing. They were like, no. They just didn't do it, so I missed it out.
You can get a similar effect from certain films that are played in a higher frame rate for 3D.
Yeah.
I think. I'm not actually sure, but
I think you're right, because
when you look at it, it's a little disconcerting because you think, wait a minute, those are just costumes.
Right, because it's happening
in front of you. Those are just actors in costume.
Yeah, it does. It goes from being this thing, this window through which you're seeing this world, to being it, to having it, you're part of it. It's like if you were
It's like
making
yeah,
the movie with them and then knowing all the bullshit that took place to make it happen.
it's like watching a stage play.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I don't think it should be adopted universally, but I think there's a place for that. I think there's films that could benefit greatly from being shot in such a way.
Yeah, maybe like
So-
more like internal, like interpersonal dramas, like the kind of thing where it's like it's happening in front of you. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like
Or
yeah, like Lord of the Rings. I don't
maybe-
think should be in 4K, if in 48 frames per second, because it should
Yeah.
feel like another place. It shouldn't feel like it's happening.
I agree. I agree. Although, in saying that, the artificiality of seeing it in such great detail does kind of help with a little bit of the otherworldliness. Like there is a little bit of the uncanny about it,
That's true.
where you can't quite believe what you're seeing.
Right. That's so rare, but when it happens, I am so thankful for the effort that went in to make that achievable.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, they had to do it with The Hobbit. I don't know if you're a big fan of the Hobbit movies, but
There's a lot in them that I enjoy. Ultimately, I think they were mistakes.
yeah,
We could have done without them.
yeah.
And if we were
right?
going to have The Hobbit, could we have just one movie?
That's all we need.
We already have a really good Hobbit movie in the animated.
Yeah, exactly. You're good. And they managed to make that work, but then again,
It's a magical journey.
well, that's
It's got a great Gollum. There's some
yeah.
songs.
I
The
argue.
songs are really good.
I argue that the Rankin Bass Gollum's the best Gollum. Like,
I argue that too,
yeah, because he's
on certain nights.
well, I miss it. Like, I mean, when you're watching like Fellowship, and he's got the reflective eyes, and he's almost green, and then you get to Two Towers, and you're like, oh, he's just a naked schizophrenic guy. Like, that's a little less fantastic and a little more like kind of just uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't not knocking Lord of the Rings. I love Lord of the Rings. I'm just saying,
No.
like it's
They're one of the Lord of the Rings trilogy is one of the great achievements in film.
Let me ask you this, just as a fan of sword and sorcery and fantasy and everything like that, and as a connoisseur, why is it that? Because this is something I was like a couple of years ago. I was watching some awful sci-fi movie that was also trying to do sword and sorcery, or was trying to do something. They tried to do like the color grade filter, like they did with Lord of the Rings, and they put money into the costumes and everything, and it just felt silly and fake. Why is it like? How is it that like they were able to achieve such a like believability in the fantastic for Lord of the Rings, and yet everyone else henceforth can't quite reach that level?
That is a fantastic question, and I'm not sure I can answer.
I mean,
that
if you actually feel that way, I mean, I don't want to like put words in your mouth or anything, but
I'm almost certain that it lies in the skill of the filmmakers and probably their trade secrets.
mhm.
But it's different. See, high fantasy is different to sword and sorcery. Sword and sorcery demands the grittiness.
Right. So you could probably achieve. I mean, did you see the new Conan with Aquaman in it?
I watched it very recently, actually, with a friend of mine who hated it with such intensity. I couldn't believe it. I think there's a lot in the movie to like. I think Momoa's performance as Conan is very good. He would make a wonderful Conan in a much better movie.
That's how I felt.
The part is perfect for him.
Yeah.
Okay, he's perfect for the role. We may never see it again.
I doubt it.
But I tell you, it is the wrong story. It's so stupid.
yeah.
They DC movie did. They did a Warner Brothers.
Mhm.
They made a world-ending plot.
Right. What Conan doesn't save the world.
Sword and sorcery doesn't have that. Sword and sorcery is about personal battles.
Right.
Intense physical struggle, survival. Okay, yourself existing is the victory.
Yeah.
Okay, quite often. Okay, and if you get rich along the way, well, that's so much the good.
Exactly.
But they put this ridiculous thing where there's a doomsday device being the mask, and the bad guy becomes a god, and gee whiz.
Yeah.
It's wrong. And this is something that arguably is wrong about Conan the Destroyer as well, because they're trying to waken the god Dagoth.
Yep.
Or, yeah, Dagoth. In that movie, which doesn't happen. They botch it and a demon appears, played by Andre the Giant.
Yeah.
And,
the Demon Man, that's great.
But Sword and Sorcery doesn't do epic stories. Okay, in fact, Sword and Sorcery almost purely exists in short fiction. That's why there's so few Conan novels. Even you don't you don't. Robert E. Howard only wrote one Conan novel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and it exists in novels at a maximum. It doesn't do like or it's rare for Sword and Sorcery to do multi-volume epic stories.
Sure.
It's not about epic. It's usually short, violent, and intense, just like life.
Right.
Okay. It's like that. High fantasy is much more about the epics and the great threat to the world and the ending of an age, and that's what Lord of the Rings is all about. Also known as epic fantasy, if you like. Yes. Just as Sword and Sorcery is sometimes also called heroic fantasy. But film is a wonderful place for Sword and Sorcery because, although it's misinterpreted as long-form fiction, it's actually quite short. It's good for adapting short stories and some novels. So, in the modern trend of doing epic length stories on film is really strange. It's a strange place to be because film on its own, like a film, is a short fiction.
Right. It's only going to be maximum 2.5 to 3 hours.
Yeah. So it's perfect length for a Hobbit adaptation.
Absolutely.
But if you want to do Lord of the Rings, you've got to do multiple films.
Yeah.
Or a TV series.
Exactly.
That's what... See, the appetite for long fiction has come up in our culture.
Yeah.
That's why TV shows are popular. We like the long series. And you know what's really strange is that instead of doing stories that belong that belong in a format that has length, that should be told in a long way, that are long stories, quite often in shows like your Daredevil or whatever, any TV show actually, they don't do that over a series. What they do is they take a short story and they'll stretch it to a series. They're doing it wrong.
Yeah, you're right.
That's why there's so much padding in these things.
Yeah, that's true.
It's very strange. I don't think they all do that, mind you, but it's something I've noticed where I'll watch a series of something and I'll think that should have been like a movie.
Right, it shouldn't have been that long. Like we
could have got that story.
Yeah.
But they're almost compelled to do it that way because there's a big market for the long format.
Yeah.
Long form, I should say. Long form storytelling.
Oh, but the reason I brought up Conan, the new Conan, was they didn't get it right. Like they did. And that actually was something that, you have a basis for comparison, you have something to adapt, you have a lot of different sources to get it right. But then, you see how they did their Lord of the Rings, and they do their, and now no one else can really replicate that success, even though there's no shortage of stories that could be Sword and Sorcery or epic fantasy or heroic journey. Like and yet nobody's able to get it right. And but we've seen it done. And and I guess your point was like, it has to do with the filmmakers.
Oh, well, if we're talking I thought you meant like in terms of immersion into the
That's
film.
really what I mean. Like, well, because like, why is it like when I see?
Well, I'll tell you that. With Lord of the Rings, it's working from something that is already brilliant.
Right, and it's kind of the first. Like, it informs the rest of it.
The Conan movie. This is the important distinction. The Conan movie had an original story written for it.
Ah.
No good.
No.
Conan's a wonderful character, and you can put him on a lot of stories, and you can write great stories for him, but they didn't.
Right.
And they didn't adapt one of the great stories that could be made into a film.
Right.
Like Tower of the Elephant is a classic Conan story that could work as a great film. Or Red Nails, I guess, is the other one that people like to go to, which would make a brilliant film. Or could make a brilliant film.
In the right...
the basis of a brilliant film.
It's funny that that reminds me of, just as a quick aside, the Die Hard movies. Now, bear with me. The Die Hard movies, Die Hard was originally adapted from a novel, but it's very different. The movie is very different from the book. But all the Die Hard movies up until, I think, 5 were other scripts that were for the movie that you saw. Like Die Hard with a Vengeance, for example. The third one with Sam Jackson, where there's Simon... Simon says riddles and they got to go across the city. That's a movie called like Simon Says that
I
didn't
think I've heard that before.
right
Yeah,
that
yeah.
doesn't work. They're all the Die Hard movies are scripts that don't quite work, and then they go, "Oh, we're gonna make a Die Hard movie. Put John McClane in it and adapt the script around McClane. Now you have a Die Hard movie, and that's why you like them."
Very interesting.
But
Very interesting.
Die Hard 5 is purely like they went write a Die Hard movie, and this is what they came up with, and it's why it's so terrible. And it's like maybe the reason why Conan doesn't work is because like Hollywood doesn't get him, and you can't write your own story. Like you can't trust them. It's why there's no.
Yes.
It's why they're having trouble writing. We're doing DC superhero movies because like none of them are adaptations, and the one that is a straight up adaptation is Aquaman. Aquaman is a straight up adaptation of an actual comic book, and it's the one everyone likes. Yet,
I'm going to tell you though, there's more factors.
mm-hmm.
I don't think Conan is a hero for all times. Like,
Oh,
even
no.
if they did him quote unquote right,
Yeah.
I don't know that the audience is guaranteed to accept that in every era.
Well, look at Dredd. Dredd.
Oh,
Dredd is
fantastic
a
example.
fantastic movie, and no one saw it because nobody wanted to watch a movie about a fascist in a building. Like nobody wanted to see that thing. But if Dredd had come
until
out,
they saw it, then they realized
then
they wanted to.
Well, but if Dredd had been, if that movie had been made in 1986 or in 1975 or in 1993,
Oh, yeah.
you
Would have been a big hit.
it'd be a franchise. You'd have action figures of Dredd. You'd have a cartoon show.
Yeah,
But
that's
anyway,
true.
yeah. So you're right. No, you can't just make a Conan movie and expect it to do well.
Well, no. You can't even adapt really good Conan stories and expect them to work.
Yeah.
Which we've seen happen in the series, Conan the Adventurer.
Oh, you're talking about that cartoon
Starring-
show with all the.
No, I'm talking about the live action
Oh,
one
yeah, that's
starring
right.
Ralph Moeller. That show was really wonderful. It's no good. It's riding on the coattails of the Hercules and Xena,
Yeah, that makes sense.
movement at the time. And it's very low budget, very low talent. But quite often there's some sincerity there. And I think Ralph Moeller is a really good Conan, for what it's worth.
Gotcha.
He's not a great actor, but... And I think it's supposed to be the same Conan as was in the Conan the Barbarian film. I think it's like
It's like a continuation.
trying to
of that
follow on.
series.
I think so, but Conan is much more heroic. He's much more a good person. He's more friendly to modern values, that sort of thing.
Gotcha.
He's less barbaric, unless barbaric means he's a very muscular man who doesn't wear much and has a sword.
Well, that's what the popular culture would interpret as.
Sure.
Barbaric.
Have you seen the film The Barbarians, starring the Barbarian brothers?
No, I have not.
It's a film about two brothers who are part of a traveling troupe, and they're attacked one day and they're taken away and enslaved,
Okay.
basically. And they grew up to be very strong, and eventually they escape. But the narration says they were not ordinary men. They were barbarians. But the only distinguishing thing that makes them barbarians to this film is the fact that they're really strong and don't wear shirts.
Right.
They don't actually have an external origin. They're not outside society. They're not wanderers from another culture. They're not strangers in every land they go to.
And I presume they're only made big by being enslaved. Like
By being
because
enslaved.
they're forced to work out all the time. They're now huge. Like it's not.
Yeah, they are made to fight each other. They wear helmets that cover their faces. One is gold and one is silver.
Mm-hmm.
And each brother learns to hate the other.
Oh.
It's a really good movie, but it's one of those movies that isn't any good,
Right.
but is really good at the same time.
Okay.
It's played by these two brothers, these twins, who are bodybuilders in real life.
Sure.
As is the way.
Yes.
And they would be known as the Barbarian Brothers in their bodybuilding performances.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they were given a film, and they don't even pick up a sword for huge chunks of the movie. They're unarmed for a lot of it. It's
just their bigness.
showcasing their physiques and strengths and terrible acting.
Uh-huh.
But I have a great fondness for that film. I watched it fairly recently. It's good stuff. The villain is wonderful in that movie. He's a very fey. He's not really a sorcerer, but he's a warlord almost of a kind that relies more on cunning and
I see.
And-
Okay.
he's a very interesting villain. I'd love to watch it again and think more deeply on it next
Right.
time I watch it. Have a better description. But I recommend that film, and I recommend the series Conan the Adventurer, even though it's completely numbing if you watch it on your own. Watch it with friends.
Sure. You're more
some of the
likely to
episodes.
point out, like, yeah, you're more likely to make observations and think about it more critically if you're with an audience.
It also features, what's his name, Danny Woodburn, I think, the small man from Seinfeld.
Yes, I actually I remember you mentioned it in a previous conversation we had, and so I looked it up and I was like, oh yeah, there he is.
Funny how that show was always on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah, Conan the Adventurer. Now, of course, as a kid, I grew up with Conan the Adventurer, the cartoon show,
Yes.
which was also terrible.
Well, I've barely seen any of it. I'd really love to watch it now.
It's interesting because like the theme song is an earworm. It'll never leave you.
Funnily enough, I know the theme song.
Oh yeah,
Conan
the Adventurer.
the Adventurer.
Yeah. But I
Conan.
I got that song stuck in my head the other day, and so I pulled it up. And one of the things that struck me was how American Conan sounds. And Conan's just
I don't
like
know how he sounds. I don't think I've seen it.
Conan literally just, okay, let's go, and it's like, whoa, no. Conan sounds like he grew up in suburbia. He's just really happy. This doesn't work. And he has like the villain is Rathamon, a snake man.
Oh, Rathamon.
And
I remember that from the dramatic narration over the title.
yes,
sequence.
exactly, the dramatic narration, which is great because it's so fun how the narration skirts, tries to obfuscate the idea. Like, okay, so Conan, obviously, if he had a sword in his hand and he's trying to vanquish evil, he's going to kill it with the sword. But in the case of the cartoon show for children that's trying to sell action figures, he taps them with the sword and then banishes the serpent men to another dimension. It's like, oh yeah, another dimension, sure.
Is this the one? Is it the Star Metal?
Yeah,
it's obsessed with, or is that a different Conan
I think that's the
cartoon?
same one. Yeah, no, well, because there were two Conan cartoons. One of them had like a cast of like multiple friends. You know, there was like an acrobat woman and like there were a bunch of different people in that one.
Was one of them called Conan and the Young Warriors?
Yes,
or
it was. It was called Conan and the Young Warriors.
Any good?
I think it was as good as the Conan the Adventurer show. Conan the Young Warriors. I think that show had it was the Conan and a bunch of kids.
And I'd like to watch it. I'd like to see where it lands. Do you think we covered any good ground today, Sal?
I think we had a fine conversation, and I think we did explore the concept. We actually wound up. I took mental notes. Whenever we would go on a tangent, I found we would invariably rest on some aspect that explored supervillainy, and so technically we did discuss supervillains today, and I'm very proud of this episode. I think it's going to be great.
Oh, dang.
I mean, I think it's fantastic, and I definitely think it's left us with more ground to explore, and I guess we'll just have to save it for next time. And I'll have to make sure we do this not in a year. We'll do it like in a shorter amount of time. You were saying
shorter amount of time. I think it might have been 2 years actually, Sal.
Jesus Christ, really? That's
maybe.
My
I wish I'd mentioned Spawn.
Oh my God! Well,
because I was watching the HBO animated series on YouTube. Yes. Funnily enough, I found it. I've seen some of the early episodes.
Yeah.
It is a fascinating. It is a fascinating study of superheroes, and I expect I hadn't thought of it in these terms, and I'm thinking, man, does Spawn even have supervillains? Well, maybe, because that robot guy shows up.
Yeah,
and is he a supervillain only because he opposes Spawn? And is Spawn even a superhero?
I don't think so. I don't think
so
Spawn
either.
is straight up not a superhero. Spawn.
He looks like one.
He does. He has a cape. But even
he seems totally self-absorbed in his own problem. He's more like a hero.
Yeah.
Hero.
No, he completely
or a protagonist.
Right. Exactly. He is a protagonist. He is not a hero at all. He doesn't save anybody.
I don't know.
Actually, the world is worse with him in it. Like the people.
That's true of superheroes, though.
That's true, but like everyone he loves, completely screwed because he exists. Like
that's another superhero trait.
Yeah, that's true. So I guess he could be. One could make the argument he is a superhero, though I would say he doesn't embody any of the characteristics of either a hero or superhero. He's entirely self-serving.
Well,
he doesn't even accomplish goals. Like he doesn't succeed.
from what I've seen, from what I've seen, he's like a localized superhero. You know, like how Superman operates in New York, Batman's in Gotham.
Right.
He is localized to those alleys where those bums are.
That's exactly right.
He is totally superhero of those alleys.
Yes, he is their
Nowhere
superhero.
else. He's the superhero of those guys. I don't know if it changes later, or I don't know what happens.
No, I mean,
I've got no idea.
Well,
I know I love the look of Spawn, and I think Todd McFarlane's a great artist.
he is a great artist, and Spawn looks dope. Like there is no doubt about it.
Yep.
But after you get to like issue 60 of the comic, and after you get through the first season of the show, you're kind of like, I'm kind of done with Al Simmons.
I was just about to say, it doesn't seem like a story that goes on. Like, I don't think Spawn would occupy the hero position indefinitely like Spider-Man does.
No.
I think he would conclude his story, and then he'd be gone. He would decay.
Yes. Well, I mean, the nature of his powers are such that he can, like, if he uses them too much, he will eventually die.
Yeah, that's true. That's the only way to end the story then.
Oh, and they don't. It's frustrating.
Yeah.
He runs out of powers. He literally runs out of powers by issue 50.
Can't we do like a Phantom thing? I guess Phantom's a bad example. Can't we make him like a legacy character where we can have a different?
Oh, they
Spawn?
did. They did when they. It's too bad they didn't do it like naturally, but they do have that. Like
maybe they were worried about it being predictable. Like this was the 90s. Like today, people are worried about being predictable, and at that time, people were really worried. Sometimes the more obvious choice makes for the better story.
Yeah, that's true.
You know.
Yeah.
Referencing to Star Wars actually would be appropriate here.
Oh, definitely. By the way, I did a quick search. Apparently, Hasbro Studios recognized that there was a Conan the Adventurer show on YouTube, and so they've like taken the liberty of grabbing scenes from the series and putting those up. But apparently, I think that the show Conan the Adventurer, the animated series, will be available through like DVD or something.
No doubt. I'll get a hold of it somehow. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter.
But yeah, but I certainly was watching that show not too long ago. I was like, oh, look at this. This is the whole show. But
Wait a minute. We were closing down.
we were closing
And
down. You got me on Spawn.
Spawn is really interesting.
He is.
I'll say that
interesting.
it's very interesting. I think the story is very interesting. It's very much of its time,
Oh yeah,
and in that it's fascinating to see.
and it's
the kind of-
enduring. Like Spawn
It-
is
it's-
such a like. Yeah, he is an everyman kind of character. You sympathetic, and it's also it's an uncomplicated story, you know. Soldier goes to hell, makes a deal with the devil to get his. I mean, like the deal with the devil is a trope in and of itself. But he makes a deal with the devil. The devil tricks him, and now he's an agent of the devil. That's all you need. So
That's good. That's a great premise.
yeah, I wonder if it's a whole show. We could probably explore Spawn. That's
Great premise, strong art. I don't know. I'd have to read the comics.
yeah, it's
Some of them,
interesting
anyway.
because
Some
the
of
comics
initials.
meander because Todd McFarlane is not a writer,
Yeah.
and he was trying to do other things while Spawn was coming out. Like Spawn became a runaway success, and also it was the flagship character for a brand new comic books company, and
Yeah.
that company was setting the gold standard for art and production in the comic book industry, which was on fire at the time. And also, he was trying to become a toy manufacturer. Like he was doing all these different things. So there was
It was a
crazy
golden
time.
age.
It was a golden age. You're absolutely right.
I'd argue that the story wouldn't have to be strictly good for the comic to have value.
And it isn't, but it does. Like the comic is, and it's interesting because occasionally I will go back and like grab an old issue and look through it, and I'm like, this really does look really good. And when McFarlane decides not to draw it anymore, which is a damn shame, he gives it to Greg Capullo, who is also great, and arguably the book almost looks better when Capullo takes over.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Look.
And Capullo now draws. Well, he used to, but Capullo had been drawing Spawn probably for 50 issues, and then a few years ago he got on the Batman book, and he was like, it was like he was training to draw Batman. It's just like, oh, a brooding character enveloped in shadow on a rooftop with a big cape. I can do that. I've been doing that for 10 years. If you are in any way intrigued by this conversation, or if you found the Bard to be particularly fascinating, as I always do, go over to youtube.com/Bardic Broadcast, or simply go to the description box below this video and click the link and go subscribe to his channel, and you will be rewarded with a treasure trove of incredible unboxings and analyses galore. Your insights are always a pleasure and a feast for the mind. I do appreciate you stopping by and joining me again, and I hope that the next time we do this, it won't be nearly as long.
Very very fine conversation. Oh, occasionally I stream on Twitch as well.
That's well, I'll have to follow you on Twitch. What's your Twitch handle?
It's Bardic Broadcast, the same as.
Oh well, that's branding, ladies and gentlemen. That's
it's no, it's very occasional though. I do it very rarely.
Okay,
but I do it on occasion.
And
because I'm not on Twitter or social media really, I put a notification about it on my YouTube conversation. What is it called?
Oh yeah, the community tab.
The community tab. That's right.
Yeah. I'm getting versed in that as well.
I don't know if many people see that, but that's okay. I only muck about on Twitch. I don't do it for serious.
Gotcha. Well, look, what is serious when it comes to playing games or playing around on Twitch anyway, you know?
Yeah, I suppose.
Take it seriously, you're in for trouble. But
you're in for trouble.
But thank you so much for joining me, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks a lot. So long.
Farewell.